We lost the plot. We as Democrats nationally, from Latinx to defunding the police to police organizations are all racist to bringing a set of cultural wars to our schools. We are on the losing side of those cultural wars. Full stop. You are worried about bathroom access and locker room access. Why don't you focus on classroom excellence? You have 50% of our kids not reading at grade level.
Well, they can just say we can do both.
You've proven you can't, because you've permitted a 30-year low in reading and math scores, and nobody seems to be calling the whistle on this. We've lost the plot.
Why?
Because the party got unanchored. Every one of our most successful electoral presidents anchored themselves in what I call middle-class values and values that are universal, at least in this country, ascribed to. We went from acceptance to advocacy. Big difference. And I'll just take one on that I shouldn't. So here goes. I remember fighting for Title IX. The reason we are champions in women's sports in the Olympics and soccer, hockey, etc., is Title IX. Why would you undercut the premise of Title IX with the ability of trans men playing in women's sports? To me, it's insane.
It's baffling.
You're undermining one of the great accomplishments we as a country, but also spearheaded by the Democratic Party, Title IX. And we're undercutting it.
It's not a great time to be English. We were annihilated by the Australians at cricket. We were destroyed by the Scottish and the Irish at rugby. Our royal family is in serious trouble, and we have a completely useless government. But we do have Hoxton. Fuck me, that's good.
I don't know anyone, okay, and you guys in the room, you might be Democrats, Republicans, who thinks the spending, that sending another $1 trillion to Washington, D.C. will actually improve anything. So when you say raise taxes, if you said raise taxes and directly give it to the people who need it, I'd do it. No,
so
but that doesn't know what happens.
We are running out of time.
It goes to all these interest groups, and they give it to their friends and all that, which is why the people are considered a swamp. It's kind of a swamp. There's 17,000 lobbying groups, but bank companies are guilty too. They're just fighting for their one self-interest as opposed to what's good for my country. But that's what happens in Congress. And you see how these bills get spent. Like the CHIPS Act was a good idea until. It had to be unions, place-based, child care, diapers. What the hell are we doing? And we do it over and over, and then it fails, and then we spend more money because the problem is we didn't spend enough money.
So you're a man with many strong opinions. We've heard that in the last few minutes.
What's funny is, did you see the reporter trying to cut off Jamie Dimon?
Oh yeah.
They don't want to talk about that. You see, that's a room full of oligarchs right there. Okay, they want the $1 trillion going to Jamie Dimon's being honest. He goes, you got a piece of good legislation, but then you want to throw in this, you want to throw in that, and you always say, all right, fine. If you want to take $1 trillion and give it to the people that need it, but it never gets to the people that need it. You remember after 9/11 that there was a lot of people giving personal contributions to go directly to the families. And they were giving them to these charitable organizations. And the charitable organizations were, of course, taking their skim off the top. Okay. And the one guy was on Bill O'Reilly saying, well, the money's going for lawyers. Bill O'Reilly got it. Not that he didn't always get mad. He's like, they don't need lawyers. They need money. What are you talking about? But it's the same principle. Of course, we're going to talk about giving money to the American people or helping the American people. But we got to take our cut, Joe Resinello. We got to take our cut. And we got to give our friends their cut, too. I mean, that's what that's all about, not for nothing.
It's good to be back in the seat. Like John Thune, we took 2 weeks off, but we actually did work. We're going to be talking a little bit about that as the show progresses. But to be honest, just to kind of piggyback on your thought, everyone knows that the system doesn't work. He just said the quiet part out loud. People have to get that through their head. America is an oligarchy. Sadly, though, the left right now, and to some degree successfully, has messaged that the answer is hard socialism / communism. And you're going to see that play out in Texas with James Tallarico soon very well. I think, to be honest with you, he has a shot. to be honest, even though he's a very flawed candidate and he has a lot of clips saying some very crazy things. His message is the same message of Mamdani, and Mamdani won in New York City. And that is going to be the message of the Democratic Party. We have the answer. That isn't the answer. And what we're looking at is not capitalism. It's crony capitalism. And Jamie Dimon laid it out very clearly. It is crony capitalism, and America is an oligarchy. There is the key to fixing America. It's not the vote. That's the system that has to change. How does it change? It changes very simply. Stop with the campaign financing. That is the major constituent for both the Republicans and the Democrats in both the Congress and the Senate. You are not the constituency. The constituent is the person who gives them money because they need money to stay in their seat. I just solved the problem of America's politics right there, people. Listen up and listen clearly. No candidate can do anything, Republican or Democrat, until that is solved.
I agree 1,000%. By the way, and we're going to talk about a few things tonight. We're going to talk about the oligarchy. We're going to talk about the Pope and the president. That seems to be a big controversy going on this week. Ireland's a mess. Canada's a mess. And is there any hope? Father Chad was on with Tucker Carlson. We got a clip with you there. Like, what is the hope? Now, we know, because we're Christian, that we have hope in Christ. Okay. That doesn't mean we don't go through a lot of pain and suffering, generally speaking, self-imposed. Let me ask you a question, Joe Rossinello. How shocked were you that Rahm Emanuel actually did say the quiet part out loud? In other words, he might, Joe, he might be secretly watching the front line with Joe and Joe. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there, okay? But he said something we've been saying for a long time. What are the Democrats going to do? Pro-women, pro-feminist, pro-abortion, but now you're letting men beat the crap out of women in boxing, okay? Or in soccer, or in these other sports, and you're undermining the very thing that you fought for as a party. You're undermining it. I don't see how they're doing it, how they're able to look at their Democrat constituency, particularly women, with a straight face, okay, and say that they know they're allowing men in women's sports. I'm surprised Emanuel said that. I really am.
Well, Carville, who was involved in the Obama / Clinton, administrations, not as much Obama, but definitely in the Clinton administration. But he still definitely had a voice in the party, says the same thing. He's just clearly insane right now. Carville has completely gone off the deep end. I invite people.
He's turned into a real weirdo.
Dude,
he's turned into a real weirdo.
Nuts, off the hook, crazy. But it's the same message. They have lost the plot. They are appealing to the 20% and not the 80%. But here's the deal, though, and it's going to be interesting to see. In the midterms, most probably, depending upon how the vote basically gets structured when it comes to mail-in ballots, voting after Election Day, that's a case that's brewing in Mississippi, most probably is going to lean in Trump's favor. Obviously, the SAVE Act, I don't think it's going to pass. Do Americans understand what's at stake? Really? Because how do you vote for a Mamdani? Honestly, Mamdani's also recently said that he's going to raise everyone's taxes because he doesn't have the money to pay for the illegal migration that came into New York City. Eric Adams, who was the mayor before him, had said that very clearly, that they created a budget deficit. And Mamdani's answer is to take your money to give it to people who are then going to vote against your interest. That is the plot.
Right.
Do people see it? You see, Joe, this is my frustration. Are people connecting the dots? They're not. They're simply not. Are people going down rabbit holes that history has shown extremely clearly that don't work? And this is the tragedy that is at hand. And again, I am not waving the Donald Trump flag. I have many issues with Donald Trump. But the comparison between the two parties right now, the Donald Trump vision and the Mamdani vision, the AOC vision, is crazy versus common sense. Now, again, don't get me wrong. I could go through many things that I have issue with Donald Trump, but I am not voting for Kamala Harris.
No.
I don't know how anyone can vote for Kamala Harris based upon historical trends, based upon radical socialism, what it does to a country. Don't believe me? Look at Canada right now. Canada is a wreck. It is a wreck. And again, are our people seeing this? They kind of talk, Joe, because I do talk to people, like this is the Democratic Party of like Jimmy Carter. Like, oh, you know, this will be the midterm. No.
If it was, they'd listen to Rahm Emanuel.
That's
who's
right.
Saying what,
you hit it right on the head. You hit it right on the head.
We said before, what's one of the, and we're going to talk about a lot of things today. We're going to talk about election integrity, oligarchs. Joe, what have we said before? There must be shadiness in the elections, okay, that needs to be cleaned up because these people are too extreme. They're too extreme for even many Democrats, okay? No, as Emmanuel just said that. You fight for women's rights, Title 10, whatever the case might be, Title 9, whatever it was. You fight for that, and then you tell a guy who thinks he's a woman or pretending to be a woman they could be a woman's sport. There must be election fraud because these people shouldn't even be holding office. Ketanji Brown Jackson should not be on the Supreme Court. She could not tell the United States Senate what a woman was. That's a disqualifier, Joe.
Oh, there's
That's
lots
a disqualifier.
of disqualifiers. I am embarrassed. And to be honest with you, when I get my news, I get it on X, and when we put the show together and look for various clips on various subjects that we bring to you guys, not only am I embarrassed, I am not terrified is a good word, and also I get depressed. Now, you mentioned hope. Obviously, Christ is in charge. I'm not talking about as far as Christian hope, as far as you know, that there is a heaven and that God holds the levels of power and he permits things for a reason. I get it. But I do love America. I do love what we had and what we could have. And watching it fall apart is disheartening and sad.
It's sad.
It
You're
truly
right.
is. And that's
It is.
where I get like, again, do I see the grander picture as a Catholic? Of course I do. That's why I had 5 kids.
Right.
If I didn't have children, that would say a lot more. I clearly have hope, but at the same time, you look at something, the American experiment. We are destroying ourselves.
Yeah.
And that is sad, Joe Pasillo.
No, listen. I put up on the screen, Trevor. Hey, everybody in the chat room. Welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe. He says, weak men bring hard times. Joe, we live in an age of weak men, and we have now for a while. Why was radical feminism able to take hold? Because of weak men. Conniving men on one hand who take advantage of weak men on the other. But Trevor's exactly right. Why? Because I'm the strongest guy in the room? Because you are? No. But I know the difference. What you mean by a weak man is a man who does not fight for those things that are good, true, and beautiful, and let the enemies of just common sense run roughshod over our society. And we've been dealing with that, regardless of an R or a D at the end of their name.
100 years. So like about 100
We've been dealing with it for a very long time, and that's the problem. Now, let's get into a conversation a little bit. You're with the front line with Joe and Joe. So the Pope and the President, okay? And this is going to be interesting. I'm going to want to make it a little bit more general. I want your input. But let's go to Michael Knowles talking about, because there's a recent to-do going on between Donald Trump and Pope Leo XIV, and we're going to give you our take. Here's Mike Knowles.
For the Pope's comments and the president's post on Truth Social, I counted 4 types of reaction. The first group sided entirely with the president, and they lambasted the Pope as a hippie and a commie who sometimes wears a funny hat. That group believes, at least implicitly, that politicians are the only public moral authority that we need. The second group of people sided entirely with the Pope against the president, whom they insisted should never dare to criticize the pontiff. These are the theocrats. These are the ultramontanists. This group, at least implicitly, views political leaders as nothing more than functionaries working for the real guys in charge, who are the clergy. Then there was a third group. And the third group, at least at first glance, seemed like the most normal. The third group wants the Pope and the President not only to stop fighting, but to stop talking, and certainly to stop talking about the same things. This is the group that thinks the President should stick to politics and the Pope should stick to religion, and never the twain shall meet. This group, despite seeming the most normal, is actually the least realistic of all. Because that group ignores, by my count, roughly 1,500 years of history. That group misunderstands the nature of politics, the nature of religion, which are not so easily separated as some ideologues would have it. The President cannot avoid talking about religion because he cannot govern without recourse to morality and justice and even man's ultimate ends. Likewise, the Pope can't avoid talking about politics because he shepherds a flock that lives in the world. Political liberalism sometimes pretends to have resolved once and for all the tension between the temporal power and the spiritual authority. But it hasn't. You know, liberalism claims a lot of things, and like most of liberalism's claims, this one also is nonsense. Political leaders still need religious sanction. Religious leaders, at least the last time I checked, still lived in time and space. If you thought the President's Truth Social post about Pope Leo was bad, just wait until you hear about what the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV did to Pope Gregory VII. It was bad. It was rough.
See, I'm with Mike Knowles on that, because the fact is, he's right. That third group he's talking about, the ones who don't want the Pope and the President to even talk to each other. No, that's not realistic. Let's make it specific in America, when the faithful, because of our political leaders, are forced to accept transgenderism, are forced to accept abortion on demand up to the moment of birth, are forced to accept all these things. The Pope has every right and duty to protect me and my family by speaking out against these things. They make it political. The enemies of the church want to get into religion and morality by trying to destroy it. And then they want to tell the Pope to shut up. Well, no, you see, it doesn't work that way. And we were talking, like Trevor mentioned, about weak men. We're not going to be weak men and let you bully us out of the public square. So the Pope might not have to talk to President Trump, but I'm going to, and you're going to. And as Catholics in America and Christians in general in America, we're going to. And we're going to make our religious voices heard, because you're attacking my religious values when you say, if my son goes to a public school, he's got to wear a rainbow flag pin. You've made it religious, and then you want to tell the religious people you're making a religious argument. Shut your mouth. Joe, sorry, not going for that, and I'm not going to be bullied out of the public square. And Pope Leo's got I'm not even talking about the content of what he said. Just in general, popes have told emperors and princes and kings in the past what to do. One can just think of Henry VIII. Throw it over to you.
Couple comments. Let's talk politics first off. There are 1 in 5 people in America that are baptized Catholics. 20% of America, roughly, is Catholic. Now, that doesn't mean all those people are practicing Catholic. I think from what I last saw, 9% of Catholics go to Mass. So you cut that down a little bit. Those are like a little bit more serious. And then divide in that group people who go to daily Mass, people who go to confession regularly. It even drops a little even further down the line. But 1 in 5 are baptized Catholic. They at least recognize the church. Their families recognize the church. They got baptized. This was a political bad decision on Trump's part. Ultimately, Catholics, serious Catholics, not all, but serious Catholics, meaning those, because there are people who are just Catholic in name, just like there are people who are Jewish in name, just like there are people in Protestant in name only, will always side with the Pope over the president. That's a reality. So this was a bad fight to pick. Secondly, he could have articulated his position better. His tone was very poor, Donald Trump's tone. Now, that's who he is. That's part of his flaws. You got to kind of accept that. That's reality. That's the Donald. Lastly, the Pope's right. This is not a just war. By definition, I invite people to look at Dr. Edward Fazer, he's been on our show. He is a philosophy professor in California, very learned. He's been laying out exactly why in very clear language. If you follow him on X, you will see this is not, by definition, a just war. So he really, obviously, he has a position. Trump, he has an idea what he's trying to accomplish. Whether he accomplishes that remains to be seen. But as far as the Pope's right to speak on that, he has every right to speak on it and should. And I also like that type of engagement. I'd like to see more of it on the other side of the aisle, which we haven't seen. And I've talked about that extensively on other podcasts as well. Religion has a voice in politics, as Mike Knowles rightfully articulated. If you look at history, you will see, particularly in the Bible, Old Testament history, the prophet plays a role with the king. It's sometimes an uncomfortable relationship, but the voice of the prophet should be a voice that the king listens to. And there are also examples of history where that did take place in a very effective manner. And we're not seeing that here. There was a time in America, not saying that he's a prophet, but Billy Graham, Franklin Graham's father, was very close with presidents. Now, America isn't a Catholic nation, but he was a good man and he was a man of God. I mean, myself and Billy Graham, we're not on the same page theologically, but he did have the ear of a president, and that's a good thing. You know, like where a man of God is talking to, you saw that with Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II. They were friends. They spoke to each other. It's a shrewd course of action for the king to listen to the prophet. And that is not what Donald Trump is doing. So he fails on the political level because it was a bad political decision. And he fails on the level that he's not listening to the prophet. Like Pope Leo or not.
Michael Jones thinks Donald Trump he's just living in his own mind, that he just does whatever he wants. He says whatever he wants. We've said on the show a million times at the front line with Joe and Joe, I voted for him 3 times. And if he was running against Kamala Harris again, I'm going to still go vote for him again. But there's something I used to think in my mind, okay, he's usually pretty effective with his tweets, but there's many times in the past, where he's gone over the line and say, once in a while, you just got to shut up. I will say this, though. You're absolutely right. What is the phrase that the church uses when it comes to politics? The church is to the state what the soul is to the body. The church has to be the moral voice that guides the state. That doesn't mean the church is making legislation. That's not what we're talking about. But the church, and yes, the values, the morality of the church has to inform what the state does. Well, we live in a gangster state. Now, I was thinking about that this week. We'll talk about it later on when we get into the oligarchs. We live in a gangster state. You don't expect gangsters to be moral. So, and the first thing you do when a gangster sees a priest, they walk the other way because they don't want to be reminded of the evil crap that they do. But you're with the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello. Look, I said to you before, Joe, without getting into the content, the Pope's got every right to comment on war, just like Pope Pius XII in the elections in Italy in 1946 and 1948. He weighed in to Italian Catholics, admonishing them that they could not vote for the communists in 1946 and 1948. That's why he became such a hated man, by the way, because he was an outspoken anti-communist. Popes have always invaded against bad political decisions or what ought to be the right political decision. Nowadays is no different. So no, not only should the Pope speak out, Donald Trump should talk to the Pope. But you're with the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello. So yeah, I'm going to play this guy. I kind of agree with this clip. He's annoyed me on some levels because it's hard for me, Joe, it's hard for me to take anybody seriously when they talk about things like there are no kings protests, when they're so blinded by ideology, when they say stupid things like we don't want kings. That's right. That's why I voted against Kamala Harris, because I don't want queens either. Okay. And I don't want kings. Donald Trump's not a king. All right. But this is Mark Ruffalo. And then we're going to play a clip from Thomas Massie. We're going to come back and talk about oligarchs.
UTA, CAA, WME, all the smaller agencies, every union join together in this, because we're not just fighting for our industry. It's also signals to all of the other industries that are under consolidation right now in the United States, that are driving workers' wages down, that are laying people off, that are offshoring our jobs. This is a moment where we have to fight an oligarchy that is in full control of our Congress and our presidency. And the only way that we're going to win is if we fight. And the only way we can fight is by doing it together. And that's the message that we all have to understand. And the more we see each other, the braver we become.
I'm like a black pill, but it's actually a red pill. There are 30 members of Congress. I would count myself among them, and Marjorie Taylor Greene and people like Lauren Boebert and Nancy Mace. Those are my partners in the crime of uncovering the pedophiles, okay? There are about 30 folks like that, okay? 30 good people out of a Republican conference in the House that has 220. They wake up every day and they want to do the right thing, even if it would cost them their election, even if it would cost them money, if it would cost them votes. Then there's 30 bad folks. I mean, Congress, these are the ones that do the insider trading. These are the ones who are going to die in office. They'll be in a nursing home, not even voting, and their constituents won't even know it because they just get reelected. And they are evil, okay? They are the worst. They will do the wrong thing, even if the right thing would get them more votes and a better chance at reelection. They're just programmed to do the wrong thing. Okay, 220 minus 30 minus 30. That leaves 160 members of Congress who are all running the same program. They're like NPCs. They will follow whichever set of leadership prevails. And by the way, right now, it's the bad set that prevail, okay? And the bad set are driven by the lobbyists. What's interesting is Mike Johnson went from he was among the 160. He was never among the 30 good guys. He was among the 160, and he became one of the 30 who do the wrong thing every day. But if our good 30, well, first of all, if I win this reelection, you get 29 more Thomas Massies, because there are 29 waiting to see, of the 30 good ones, waiting to see if I can win. They come up to me on the floor and tell me, this is the right vote. I just don't think I can take this vote and get reelected. Okay, we can give them an existence proof that you can get reelected. And by the way, if there were 30 of us who were getting in trouble for doing the right thing, then that money, the Israeli lobby would have to spread their money out. I actually like that Lindsey Graham's race is close, because I imagine the RJC and the AIPAC are now rushing down to South Carolina to do triage on their robot.
So there's a lot of interesting stuff between the both clips. Let me address Mark Ruffalo for a second. Okay, Mark, but here's a premise. Here's a couple premises you're going to have to understand. Now, what he says about workers' wages, we say on this show all the time. But what he fails to do, because he's an ideologue, is identify why those wages have gone down. Those wages have gone down because of sexual liberation in the 1960s. When women stopped having children and went into the workforce, that drove wages down. An unattended border that lets illegals across the border. Would he be here? I'll stop there and throw it over to you. Would he be in favor, if he's so worried about workers, would he be in favor of saying, all right, Mark, we're going to have to close the border then? And everybody who's in this country illegal is going to have to go back. He would say no. He'd say, then you're not being sincere. You're not being intellectually honest, because that's one of the root causes of wages going down in this country, is that the workforce has been flooded by women who don't want to be in the workforce, but they have to be because their husbands aren't making enough money. and by illegals, and that's just two, leaving aside people with visas and everything else. So what is he talking about, really? Because to me, his words ring hollow when we got to come together. Let's come together as Americans and say that we want to protect American jobs. That means illegals can't take those jobs. He wouldn't go for that. Joe, I'll throw it over to you.
I think it was more, obviously that show that Ruffalo is definitely leaning left. I'll be kind. Is speaking to that type of audience. But I thought the sentiment was there. He nails it. It's united we stand and divided we fall. That is the problem in America. The divide of Republican and Democrat is a construct of the oligarchs. They win no matter who wins. And that is what Massey was kind of articulating as well. It is the lobby. That is the blob. That is the deep state. That's what dictates to us. How do you solve these problems? You have to take away the campaign financing. That is the fix. That is the fix. I'm telling you this. And until that happens, it does not matter who the president is. Barack Obama, a while ago, every once in a while, you'll get like a politician will let the cat out of the bag. Every once in a while, they have a true moment. And Barack Obama said something. I'll never forget it. I've said this on the show in the past, but I'll never forget it because it was the truth. What he said was, our American politic, the politics of America, is fought between the 40-yard line and the 40-yard line. From the 40-yard line to the end zone, on both sides of the field, Republican and Democrat, it's set in stone. It doesn't change. The budget, the military industrial complex, foreign policy. I'll put this out there. If Kamala Harris was the president right now, would we be fighting in Iran? It's possible. It's possible because the foreign policy does not change because the American people don't have a voice in it. They pretend like you do, but they don't. And case in point, the American people are not for the war in Iran. Where are we? We're in Iran fighting a war. What the politics or the politicians do is between the 40-yard line and the 40-yard line, they throw the masses red meat. They write executive orders. They throw you a bone to gnaw on, to go crazy over. And then the pundits jump in. Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, rile up the people, rile them up. And as we get riled up, we get more divided, which speaks to what Ruffalo is talking about. The only way we defeat the blob, which is the oligarchy, which controls America, people, get it through your head. The only way we defeat them is we are united against them. We see them as the common enemy. If someone said to me, Joe, what do you stand for? On that list is not republicanism, as in I am a Republican. What I stand for is freedom. What I stand for is national sovereignty. What I stand for is I am anti-central banking. What I stand for is subsidiarity. These are things that I stand for. And frankly, if you are a thinking person, however you classify yourself, you should stand for those things too, because those things benefit the masses, the common man, the regular person who puts on his pants one leg at a time, gets on the bus and goes to work. That is the truth. But we fall into the trap of the machine. We get divided, and frankly, the oligarchs get their way. And that, my friends, is the American system, and that needs to change.
Well, that's what Massey's talking about there. You know, there's no wonder why Donald Trump hates Thomas Massey, why he had a falling out with MTG. Why, you know, anytime somebody doesn't agree with him, he lashes out at him. This is my beef with him. But just to stay on there 1 second about what you're talking about. But Joe, you got to remember something. These people don't want you. But Mark Ruffalo and people like him, Joe, they're on the far left. Here's an example. You mentioned subsidiarity. Now, states have rights and power to do many things within their states that has been eroded over time. And a very good argument I heard, that was the real reason of the United States Civil War, not slavery. It had to do with taking away the constitutional powers that the states had. All right. If Mark Ruffalo was interested in real subsidiarity, here's an idea I could get united behind. I don't agree with gay marriage. I don't think homosexuals and lesbians should adopt children. I don't agree with transgenderism. But tell you what, Mark, if you want to do that in California, I won't live there. How can we unite around certain principles then that I don't have to have anything to do with you to have at least an agreement with you on that? I'm not interested in all of that far left radical nonsense in my state. Let me run my state and people who are like-minded to me my way, and we'll respect your right to do it your way. But here's the thing, and there's historical proof of this. This is why, going back to the New Deal, this is where the idea of a radicalized Supreme Court, a political Supreme Court came in to take away one thing at a time, take away the power that the states had. Guys like Mark Ruffalo, they've made themselves your enemy, Joe Resinello. He's not interested in sitting down at the table with you unless you say that you're going to change your position on abortion, unless you say that you're going to be accepting. What did Rahm Emanuel say in that first clip? You heard what he said. Okay. He is a liberal Democrat. He goes, we went from acceptance to advocacy. You see, he's right. He's talking about these social issues or moral issues. That's what he's talking about. They went to advocacy. That means Joe and everybody listening to us out there, okay, you will accept all of this stuff. Well, I can't sit down at the table with you. You're not going to respect my right in Arizona, okay, or any state I live in to vote the way I want and to have the politics of my state reflect my values. If we could have that, I'm using Arizona as an example. Mark Ruffalo would not be in favor of that. He's in favor of an activist Supreme Court, and you have to accept everything. So I just think he's full of crap. And as far as Thomas Massie is concerned, somebody put it in the chat room. I think Eric put it in the chat room. So we need 300 Thomas Massies. If you wanted this country, if you were looking for politicians to actually do something that's profitable and good for the American people, you could get it, Joe Resinello. I agree with you, 1,000%. You're not getting it with this current crop on both sides. But if you had 300 Thomas Massies in the United States House of Representatives, this country would change overnight. Overnight.
Well, obviously, you're talking about federalism, and there was a structure in place based upon the Constitution and the founders for states' rights. That was built into the system. Sadly, over the last 100 years, probably beginning, again, I'm not a historian, but I do play one on TV, Woodrow Wilson.
You play one well, by the way.
Well, we try. It began around then where the government went to FDR. It got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the government basically got more power. It was never intended to have the power that it has now. You could track that based upon the number of employees that get paychecks from the federal government. Look at that over the course of the last 100 years. It's exponentially have grown. Yeah. So that has to change. And states' rights is a short-term fix to this. But let's look at the root of democracy itself. The Pope recently came out, made a statement about democracy, and he echoed that of our founders. Keep in mind, not only is the Pope a very learned man, never disregard that reality. All popes are learned. For those who are not Catholic who are listening to this show, highly educated people. But he's also an American. He understands the American system very well. He knows how this works. He basically said that if we are an immoral people, a democracy, quote unquote, the American democracy, turns into nothing more than a tyranny of the majority. And that's what we have right now. It's bouncing from end to end to end to end, radical, and it's going to continue to do that in a more radical and violent way. End to end, end to end. It's a tyranny of the majority. What else did the Pope say about our? I'm assuming he's talking about the America. He didn't say America, but I kind of inferred that that's what he was talking about because I think it suits it. I mean, it's the truth. What else does he say? He says that the democracy becomes a mask. What's behind the mask? Elites. Elites in the IT field, elites on Wall Street, elites in big pharma. It's a mask. Behind that mask is an oligarchy. That is the American system right now. We have a tyranny of the majority and we have a mask. Why? What's the underlying problem? Where did we go wrong? Because we're unmoored from something that's above ourselves. You see, what would unite everybody outside of suffering, which is something that does unite people, a common struggle, suffering, but then that ends and then everyone goes into their corner, is a belief in a higher power, a God. We'll never have a unified religion. This is a country of many different types of people, a plurality. It will always be that way. But it's like the principle of Alcoholics Anonymous. By the way, Catholics, a priest came up with alcohol. Actually, no, we had someone on our show. It was a Catholic that came up with the idea. The idea is you call to a higher power in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's something you're basically saying, I have a problem, and I'm saying I'm calling to something that I value above me. You see, if we had that, it wouldn't be perfect, clearly, because this is not going to be a Catholic nation. Only 1 in 5 people are Catholic, and even of that number, many of them are nominally Catholic. But it would unite people. When people believe that there's accountability from a higher power, as in, if I do this, I'm going to face the music one day. Well, in a very rudimentary definition of God's facing you in a judgmental position. It guides society. We don't have that. And that is why we have a tyranny of the majority. I'm going to stick it to you, and I don't care. Because there is no accountability.
But our system is not supposed to, obviously our system is not supposed to be that way. In other words, because the founders knew that. That's why we do not have direct democracy. That's why we don't have laws that are, let's say, voted on directly by the people. We have representatives. Because yes, democracy, I mean, we've heard it kind of ad nauseum now. Democracy. People don't understand. I don't want a tyranny of the minority, a tyranny of the majority. I want our system to function the way it's supposed to, which means that Joe and all the good people that watch us here at the front line with Joe and Joe have a voice. Now, one of the main ways that we have a voice central to our democracy is our vote.
Run some records for some states. So I think we've run something between 50 and 60 million voter records so far, and during this president's tenure. And we have found hundreds of thousands of people who shouldn't be on the voter rolls, people who are dead, people who moved, duplicate registrations. We have also found separately non-citizens on the voter rolls. And so now we're doing our due diligence to identify the extent to which they may or may not have voted. And sometimes people are enrolled on the voter rolls. We've just seen some crazy videos from California that show homeless people being used to sign petitions and register to vote or sign affidavits, could sign ballots for somebody else and fill in. And that's easy when you have a system where there's no voter ID, right, where ballots are being mailed to outdated voting lists. This is not a fiction or a fantasy. Well, Los Angeles County in 2017 agreed with a lawsuit by Judicial Watch that there were over 1 million people in that county alone who should not have been on the voter rolls.
Save America Act.
Yeah.
What's your message to Americans who are incredibly frustrated with the pace at which this is moving? I mean, it's virtually not getting done. Yeah. And now Thune is talking about not even implementing the talking filibuster the way it was intended to work. Yeah. Is there any way we can change this trajectory?
I think it's not moving. I mean, that's the problem. It's completely stuck. And for those who say, oh, this is wild, this is extreme, no, it's not. This is what we do in my home state of Missouri. We have voter ID. We have had for years. We have citizenship requirements. We have had for years. So this is not nuts. This is what most states do. It's just a few states who don't want to do it because they want illegals voting. I think the Senate should pass it. And I think, as I said a second ago, if Democrats want to stall this and don't want to vote on it, they should have to go hold the floor like it used to be in the old days. They can go and talk as much as they want, but sooner or later, they're going to run out of time, and then we would vote. And that's what I think we need to do.
But it seems like Thune specifically is, reluctant to move forward with implementing the talking filibuster.
Yeah, I'll let him speak to that. I mean, I would just say that my view is that this is extremely important, and it's just a myth that to make people actually go and defend their position on the floor is somehow a great break with Senate tradition. That's not true. This is how the filibuster's always been implemented. You want to stall something, you can go to the floor. Ted Cruz once read children's books on the floor, for heaven's sake. You know, I mean, so that is you can ask him about it. So
Do you think Congress should do more to ensure that only Americans vote in American elections?
100%, 10,000%.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the heck's going on in the United States Senate, but you know, Senate Republicans, they got to wake up. This is not 1978. It's not 1990. The Democrats are true radicals. Like, they are radicals. So we got to step up and do what's necessary.
Democrats started by saying voter ID was racist.
Yeah.
Now they're saying voter ID is sexist because they've lost the racist argument.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that showing an ID to vote inhibits somebody from exercising their right to vote?
No, not at all. You got to show it to get on a plane. You got to show it to get beer, buy alcohol, buy a house, sign a lease. Like, you have to do it to do all those things. I don't listen to the Democrat arguments anymore because
stopping the massive cheating that's gone on, and so we're going to be signing an executive order. It's I believe it's foolproof, and maybe it'll be tested, maybe it won't. I think it's very obvious what's said, and I'll ask Will Scharf to start off, attorney, a great talent, a very brilliant young man, and if you could discuss it, and then I'm going to ask Howard Lutnick to say a few words, and then I'm going to sign it, and we'll take a couple of questions. Okay? Thank you.
Mr. President, as you said, you have in front of you an executive order that deals with a number of issues relating to election integrity. As you've consistently identified, two of the biggest problems we have with election integrity in this country are, one, inaccurate voter rolls that allow ineligible people to vote in various federal and state elections all over the country. And secondarily, you've consistently identified that vote by mail in this country has become rife with fraud. People returning ballots who aren't eligible to return ballots being sent to people who aren't confirmed to be eligible voters. So what this executive order is going to do is, one, we're going to take federal data. We're going to ensure that each state's election officials are provided with a comprehensive view of who the eligible voters in their jurisdiction actually are, allowing them to properly verify that everybody voting in their elections is legally able to vote. And then it orders the Postmaster General and the U.S. Postal Service to take bold new measures to verify that ballots both being sent to people are being sent to people who are eligible to vote, and then the ballots being returned or being properly returned by eligible voters only. And we believe that...
Let's stop it there. A couple things. One is, did you hear what his guy was saying there about the Postmaster General? Postmaster General, the post office is under the executive branch. Donald Trump could hire, fire, destroy the place. He could do whatever he wants with it. That is an executive branch agency. Do you hear why that's important? They're not going to be able to do anything about this. And if he tells the Postmaster General, you got a ballot back and it's after Election Day, you don't send it, okay? Now, I know I'm saying it in a very crude way. See, this is where I like Donald Trump, because obviously this is something that he's thought about before crafting this executive order. The other one is this. I'm going to say it for the 50,000th time at the front line with Joe and Joe. Ron DeSantis in Florida proved what happens when you take measures to ensure election integrity. And Broward and Dade County, we found out, and Joe had said this before, we found out, guess what? Not only are they not blue, they're not even purple. They're red. Broward County and Dade County, they're Democrat stroke. No, they're not. It's because dead people are voting. I told you a million times, my father died in 2005. I guarantee he's casting a vote in New Jersey. If they did in New Jersey, or they do nationally, what Donald Trump is talking about and other people were talking about election integrity, and we know because I'm in Arizona, cat's out of the bag. This woman, Katie Hobbs, they rigged the whole thing. All the evidence is coming out now. Andy Biggs is running for governor. Hopefully he goes after her. Okay, we're finding all of this out. My point is this: we have we have history on our side. We know that when there's election integrity, these people will not get elected. Now you got to deal with the scumbiad, as my mother would call them. All right, the scumbiad heads on the right. But that's a different story because they're just scumbiad. They're not insane and evil like the Democrats. Joe, I can't wait till one day we do this show. We're going to find out after. Hopefully we get some of these measures in place. New Jersey is going to go red. Because in my view, New Jersey already is close to being red. It is not as deep blue as people make out. It's because dead people vote and illegals vote. This has got to end.
This is a battle of power. It's a fight for life. The Democrats say this is a battle for democracy. No, it's a battle for your power. That woman who we first played, Harmeet Dillon, is the Assistant Attorney General of the United States, for people who don't know who she is. Many states, because she asked for the voter rolls, they refused to give them up. Why would you refuse to give them up? That right there should tell you something. And the SAVE Act is straight up and down common sense. 70% of Democrats are for it. Over 70% of Latinos are for it. Over 70% of African Americans are for it. And overall, it has 80% approval nationwide, Hawaii to Maine. Yet we can't pass it. It's straight up and down common sense. That should tell you something. So what does Trump do? He signs a stopgap in executive order. There's a case in Mississippi, as I said in the beginning of the show, that's probably going to vote in Trump's favor, where after Election Day, no more mail-in ballots will be accepted. That's in the court right now. But ultimately, it's common sense. Why won't they do it? Because it gives power back to the people. Now let's step back. That's all reality. It's common sense. This isn't political. We've talked about it a lot on this show. How isn't the American population outraged over this?
I think we are.
Joe, I don't know. Because this was something that should have been put up day one. Day one. If I was the president, not now, day one. That's number one. Second of all, are people even talking about it anymore? How aren't you concerned that our voting right, and it's a right, isn't secure?
Right.
How doesn't that bother you? It should, and it doesn't. You see, this is something, if you ask me, people should be protesting in the streets. Because it says, for anyone who's connecting the dots and paying attention, it says a number of things. One, when 80% of the country wants something, our politicians don't give it to us. That means we don't count. That's the first thing it should say. But the second thing it says is we're leaving room for manipulation.
Right.
And you're okay with that. Again, I want to bang my head against the wall when I see this, Joe.
Well, the thing is, I think that Joe, you have to remember the leadership, the elites, the oligarchs, they're not going it alone, Joe. If you said to me that someone who absolutely agrees with us on everything is running for president, okay? But it's going to be a tight race. And Joe, you have to help because we're going to do a little shadiness to make sure our guy gets in. I'm going to say no. I'm not such a noble person. I'm not high and mighty. I'm not holier than thou. Joe, I'm not cheating. I'm not going to cheat. Okay. Even if my guy could get in. Problem is, Joe, you have a faction in the Democrat Party. They don't give crap. They're just as much about taking power away from you or I as just regular American citizens as the people that they vote in. And they have no problem spouting these talking points about you're disenfranchising black people and disenfranchising Latinos. They got no problem going out there and lying because they want power too. They don't want you to have any power. They don't want you to have any voice. You just made a good point. You made a good point about how they're not listening on the SAVE Act 80%. Joe, the liberal state of California voted against gay marriage. And what happened? They got a judge to block that. Then they went to a liberal Supreme Court and you got national gay marriage. You got accepted in every state. They're not interested in, I'm talking about regular Democrat people. And there's some on the right too. Regular Democrats that vote for this party, that vote for this evil, that vote for their insanity. They got no problem with cheating. None whatsoever.
That's a great example. And that speaks to what I spoke about earlier with Obama, how our politics is from 40-yard line to 40-yard line. You're only allowed to stay in that area. That's another example of that. How the oligarchy and the elites and the ruling class dictate. You see, that has to stop. That has to stop. Because if it doesn't stop, one of two things is going to happen. It's either going to go full on totalitarian like the EU right now. That is in essence almost like the Third Reich, what's going on in the EU right now. People have no say, none, zero say. Brussels dictates everything. You either have that or you have a revolution. That's where this is heading.
Yeah.
You see, it's one of two outcomes. It's one of two. Clarence Thomas warned us in 2020 when he wrote a dissent on the Philadelphia case or the Pennsylvania case when they refused basically to take the case. He wrote an article, rather. You could check it out on the Heritage Society, basically saying when people don't have confidence in the elections, it leads to trouble. And that's exactly what's going to eventually happen on one side of the aisle or the next. For instance, say J.D. Vance wins in a close race. What do you think they're going to say? The election wasn't legitimate. It wasn't
right.
Let's say AOC was to win in a very, very close race. The people on the right are going to say it was illegitimate. Mail-in ballots, illegals voted. You can't have an electoral process where people don't have confidence in the election.
Right.
It's just that simple.
It is that simple.
And the outcome is one of two things: a violent revolution or full-on totalitarianism on one side of the aisle or the other.
But one of the things that we've said on the show before here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe, by the way, wherever you're watching this, help us out. Share, and make sure, please, you subscribe wherever you're watching this. But Joe, you got to remember too, when we're talking about oligarchs, we're talking about elites, and they have an end game. This is not the end game. They have a goal of what they want society to look like. And one of the ways that they're going to amass power to themselves in order to be able to affect that type of society that they want, which would be an unbearable hell, is through violence. Don't think they don't want violence. They do want gun-owning, MAGA, conservative, Catholic, whatever, Christian. They want you to raise up violently because that's going to be their excuse to take more power to themselves. Now, just to pivot for a second. Now, you mentioned Clarence Thomas. Here you go.
Progressivism seeks to replace the basic premises of the Declaration of Independence and hence our form of government. It holds that our rights and our dignities come not from God, but from government. It requires of the people a subservience and weakness incompatible with a constitution premised on the transcendent origin of our rights.
Here's something that I don't know if he never learned in school. I'm talking about Tim Kaine, okay, Senator Tim Kaine, okay, Hillary's running mate. Do you know that he said, I don't know if you saw this clip, this was like from a couple months ago. He said in a Senate hearing, there are people in this country who think our rights come from God rather than from government and law. And he goes, oh, and by the way, he followed up with, you know who else thinks that? The Taliban. I'm saying to myself, if there was ever a disqualifier to be in the United States Senate, aside from the fact that Tim Kaine is an idiot, I know that you don't like when I call people names, Joe, but I haven't in a while, and I feel like calling him an idiot. Part of me says, is he an idiot? Or part of me saying that this is an agenda that they were, like Clarence Thomas was just saying, this is part of their progressivism to try to convince you that your belief that your rights come from God is a myth and that rights actually come from government and law. And I say, and Ted Cruz kind of went back at him, all right, and not kind of, actually said, we have a senator that just said something contrary to what actually is in our founding documents, that our rights come from God. They do not come from government and law. The government is supposed to protect the rights that I have that have come from God, my right to free speech and all the things that are in the Constitution. Okay, my right to private property. And Clarence Thomas just reiterated that. Clarence Thomas is basically saying that that is progressivism in a nutshell. One final point. I worked with a guy when I was working in New York City that said the same thing in a very mocking and scoffing way. You guys think that your rights come from God. There is no God. In other words, rights come from government. I said, so then the rights that you get from government can be taken away from you. Well, it depends on what rights they are. Then so if they all come from government, then your rights could be taken away from you, and rights could be given to you, and rights could be taken away from you. The safeguard is we're supposed to all acknowledge, getting back to Mark Ruffalo in the beginning, you want to sit down at a table with me, there's certain things you're going to have to acknowledge, and certain rights that I have that you're going to have to agree to protect. Even though you don't agree with my speech, you're going to have to agree to protect it. Joe, my larger point is they don't believe in any of this. That's why they're so radical. That's why if you had election integrity, they wouldn't get elected in this country. Not for anything, let alone Congress, House or Senate.
Well, that clip took place recently for those who maybe want to see the whole clip. And Clarence Thomas goes on to say in that clip, and the two cannot exist together. You see, the two can't exist together. They have a different worldview. Here's the reason why they will fail, because it goes against the natural law. The natural law is written on the hearts of all men. Even if we won't call it God, we'll call it the natural law for the purposes of this conversation, the purposes of the government. It is God, but it is, we'll just say the natural law. You cannot ignore the natural law. Governments have tried to do that. The USSR tried. They didn't even last 100 years. Cuba is in a state of disarray. It's not going to last 100 years. That is reality. The natural law applies whether you like it or not. It's like gravity. And that is an absolute and fundamental disregard for reality. But getting to your point, they don't believe in the founding of this country. And I'm glad that Clarence Thomas is calling them out on it. They do not believe. Mayor Mamdani does not believe in the founding of the United States of America. For instance, he's not allowing a celebration to take place on the 250th anniversary of the United States of America in New York City.
It's a disgrace. It's a
but
disgrace.
This is my point. Mamdani didn't even go as a participant for the installation of the next cardinal of New York City. He didn't even attend.
Right.
He's not hiding it. But people still, it goes right over their head and they don't see it. They get caught up in his rhetoric and they vote for him. That man is a dangerous man.
Yeah.
And this is the crop of politicians that are coming up. They do not believe in the founding of the country. What we're seeing is an attempted color revolution that have taken place in many countries in the world, and they're trying to do that here. And we go along with it. We should, and to a degree, Trump has tried and has done many good things to stop this. But don't get caught up in the rhetoric, because if they are to win the presidency, it's full steam ahead, color revolution, change the country, lockstep and barrel to what you're seeing in Europe, which is full on totalitarianism. It is fascism at its highest degree coming out of Brussels. The middle class decimated. Don't believe me? Listen to our Canadian friends in the chat and look for yourself at the Canadian news.
Well,
that is the alternative.
Here's Canada. Here's Canada for you.
Years since my wife first fled Canada to save her life in the United States from stage 4 ovarian cancer after the Canadian healthcare system left her to die, where her only option would have been to kill herself on MAID because they had no treatment for her. They lied to her and said that the HIPEC surgery wouldn't ever save her life, but it did. They lost her chemo requisition, so she never got started on that. She didn't even meet her Canadian oncologist. It was always by a phone. Well, he was the guy that lost her chemo requisition too. And every time she went to the hospital begging for help in the ER because her lungs were filling in with fluid and she was drowning in them, they kicked her out and sent her home with opioids because they didn't have anybody there to drain her lungs. So now she's getting closer to death, and in a wheelchair, in a last-minute decision, she decides to try her luck in the United States. So now we're evacuating her from Vancouver Island on BC ferries to get her into a hospital in Seattle, where they immediately got her into the system, got her started on chemo, and gave her that life-saving HIPEC surgery. Well, during this time, I'm stuck in Canada because I'm not American and I can't just come here for no reason like that. I can't live here. So my wife decides to come back to Canada to be with her family. And during that time, she has another medical emergency and finds herself again in a Canadian hospital, rotting and dying and nearly about to go septic. So again, I have to unplug her from the machines and evacuate her by car and ferry back to the Seattle hospital. And she's sick as a dog, puking bile this whole time. They get her into the hospital, and guess what? She is about to go septic, and they give her immediate surgery and save her life. Again! But she comes back to Canada. And guess what? The cancer's coming back now. So again, she has to leave. Over and over, this pattern continued until finally we decided enough is enough, and we got me a green card. We had to get the help of a Congress lady who rushed the entire process, start to finish, and I got a green card in less than 3 months. That's probably the fastest anybody's ever gotten a green card. Honestly. So here we are in Texas, and my wife continues to do really well getting state-of-the-art treatment. There's no maid here. Nobody talks about death. And in fact, last week, my wife is doing so well on chemo. Well, she's had already 2 recurrences, and she's going into a third remission. She's back squatting 175 pounds for 5 in the gym just last week. Does that sound like somebody who's ready to die, Canada? Does that sound like somebody who needs to kill themselves with MAID?
We spent time in this show at the front line with Joe and Joe talking about the oligarchs. Somebody put in the chat earlier about the guide stones down in Georgia. No, people say, well, that's just tinfoil hat conspiracy. Well, the stones exist, and there's a whole agenda on there. Central to everything, Joe, and people just need to understand this. Number one, these oligarchs, these elites, they've sold their souls to the devil. So they want the destruction of our souls. They want the destruction of our children's souls. But alongside that, they also want to destroy your life. They want death. That's part of their agenda. People think that's extreme, but it's not. And you can just look at why they champion homosexuality, because then there's less children coming into the world. There's no life there. There's no fruit there. There's nothing fertile there. They champion abortion. They champion contraception. They champion everything that not only will keep the population from growing, but also reverse population growth and bring the population down to a controllable level. These people, as you've said on the show a million times, they're about power. You can't control, well, put it like this. You can control 1 billion people a lot more easily if you're an small oligarchic group than you can control 8 billion people. Central to what they want is death. And in the case of that clip from that poor guy from Canada, Joe, sometimes it's just one death at a time. It doesn't have to be mass death like abortion. Just have a program like they do in Canada, like MAID. Lie to somebody, make them feel despair, put something in their hand that's going to make them kill themselves, and watch them die. Joe, that's part of the agenda, and people need to understand that. I'm not being hyperbolic. They want your destruction and your children's destruction.
Americans should pay attention to that man because he's a regular person. Clearly, he's not an elite. He's a normal person, and people get cancer. And that could be you. That could be your child. That could be your wife. And they do not care because, to be honest with you, and the elites and the WEF and the globalists have made it very clear, they are not interested in the population as it stands. They say only 500 million people should be on the earth. These are statements that have been made out of the WEF. They are anti-population. They are anti-human. And that is why the MAID program, which is the legalized euthanization program in Canada, exists. And right now, from the reading that I have done, it's in the top 5 leading causes of death in Canada. It keeps getting larger and larger and larger as far as how you qualify for it. And that is what they would vote for in America too. Because when you take God out of government, that's exactly what you get. You are nothing more than a clump of cells, and you are a cost on a line of an Excel spreadsheet. And that is it. And that is what you get. And people, sadly, Joe, once again, would they vote for it? I actually think people would. I don't want to suffer. Oh, I think that's a great alternative. I would never want to go through that. I have options. I want to die on my terms. let me be very clear. You won't die on your terms. Does it sound like that woman's dying on her terms? Did Charlie Gard in the UK, a 2-year-old child, die on his terms when his parents were willing to take him out of the UK and get the help he could have potentially needed in Rome? They said, no, you will die here. Because if they let him leave, it blew a hole in their system.
Right.
So they allowed the child to leave. Does that sound like you're going to die on your terms? But this is what they're pushing. Secular humanism is anti-human. Did that sound like a humane situation? Absolutely.
Not at all. Not at all.
At all. That's what you get when you take God out of government. That's what you get when you take God out of society. And that could be you. That could be your mother. That could be your child. That could be your wife.
That's right. And you have no control. And I will remind everybody, not that everybody doesn't know this, the first anti-human is Satan himself. He hates us. And this idea that, well, these people, they're motivated because they want to craft a better society. No, they hate other people. There are people in the world who are purely motivated by their hatred for other people. They don't want to be around other people. The only people they want to be around is people in their same economic class, people that think like them. Those are the only people they want to be around. That's the oligarchy. And then they want a slave class that they can control because they hate them, but they need their labor. Let's remember, labor is the source of all value. So how do you create value? Steal people's labor, just enslave them, and then kill everybody else. Sounds an awful lot like Satan to me. Now they'll say, well, I don't believe in God or Satan. Well, you will. First of all, you'll believe in Satan when you see him, because you will. Okay. Number one. But everything that these people do, just like in that video. In other words, the Canadian government wants less Canadians. Who put it in there? 110,000 people have died since they started MAID. Trevor said that. 110,000 people since they started MAID. And, we just have to get it through our heads. There are evil, evil scumbags in this world who just seek the destruction of other people simply for their own power, their own pride, their own wealth. And it's guys like us and many, many people out there that have to call this out. Now, Joe Resinello, the question is, we're going to end with this, is there hope?
Are you hopeful for the country, since you seem to pay attention to the whole country, not just
yes and no. If you, by hopeful, you mean in the sense that human beings are going to correct this, right this ship, I think it's beyond human correction at this stage. It's so bad, especially when you look at the corruption in the higher levels of government and that type of thing. But I am also hopeful that Christ, if you look at the history of how God deals with human beings, he'll let us be evil only for so long, and then he gives us a spanking. So I think that that Christ is going to correct it probably fairly soon. I mean, who knows when that is, but I think we're getting to the point where we're, especially in a post-Christian era, we're almost as bad as Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, I tell people, look, at Sodom and Gomorrah, at least they weren't trying to marry each other,
No, it's true.
Yeah, and so, so I think that we've gotten to the point where that God is going to punish us, but in a way that a good father corrects his son when he's doing bad things, right?
One thing I would recommend for everybody out there, Joe pulled that clip, obviously, with Tucker Carlson. I recommend if somebody's got a couple hours to kill and you want to hear something, a fascinating conversation, go watch that conversation that Father Chad had with Tucker Carlson, and go watch the conversation that Father Chad had with Sean Ryan. I very rarely could watch a 2.5, 3 hour interview like that. I watched every single minute, and it was very insightful. Now, to the point there, Joe, okay? You look at the Old Testament, you look at Father Chad began to allude to like how God deals in human history. The Jews had to be punished. The Israelites had to be punished at certain points in their history for them to come back. And then God showed mercy. God brought them out of Egypt, out of exile in Egypt. God brought them out of Babylonian exile and brought them back to Israel. Okay. But if collectively human beings ever needed a good hard slap in the face from our Papa, it's now. It's now. And if it comes, guess what? you know, a lot of people, good people, are going to have to suffer too. The suffering just doesn't come upon those who are wicked. If there's suffering to be had, because you know what? We can all use a little tweaking, okay? Every one of us. Good people in this country has allowed this stuff to happen for so long. Men marrying men and the law recognizing that. Two men adopting a child, two women adopting a child, and the law recognizing that. We're all going to get spanked a little bit. Joe, I'll throw it over to you.
Ultimately, before the politics gets fixed, the kingship of Christ has to be established again in America. Politics is downstream from culture. Politics is downstream from religion. And here's the good news. The buds are starting to come up from the soil. Speaking from a Catholic, the priests that are coming, you could look this up. Don't just take my words for it. The priests that are coming out of the seminaries are serious. They're not like the priests. Not saying that the priests now are not serious. They're orthodox. It's a different breed of priests that are coming out. You're seeing an uptick of people who are getting baptized in countries like France and in America. Why is that? Frankly, and the demographic, I heard it in America, from 18 to 29 has doubled in 3 years.
Yeah.
Went from 20% to 40%. Why? If you ask me, and it's men. And men lead the way. If a man runs his home from the position of priest, prophet, and king, priest being first, the family follows. That is a great statistic and a good thing to basically give us hope. Why men? Because they don't see hope in it right now, in the basic demographic of America right now, as the status quo is basically coming for them and sweeping them under the carpet. Men are getting laid to waste in America. No future, college degree doesn't mean anything, can't save money, can't buy a house, can't have a family, can't have children, don't have the money. So men are turning to God. That's a sign of hope.
It is.
And that is once we establish the kingship of Christ in America, the culture will improve, family life will improve, politics will improve, and we'll get a better breed of politicians. That the corruption will go down because it all ties into that. And God will never leave us orphan. There is always hope as long as there is God. But to your point, and if you look at it from a historic perspective, the Old Testament, Exodus and return, Exodus and return. When the Jewish people left God, their society collapsed. When they returned to God, things normalized. Exodus and return. But the buds of Christ and the buds of a better life, they're starting, Joe Pasillo.
I think so.
We probably won't see it. Could take a couple generations, but it's starting.
I will say this, and then we'll sign off. The thing that strikes me, Joe, about the idea of there's going to be suffering, when I think of Exodus, right? God didn't didn't defeat Pharaoh, deliver the Israelites out of Egypt, and send them straight to the Holy Land. They wouldn't have learned anything, okay? They had to spend 40 years in the desert. They had to suffer in order to understand what it is. Now, again, generations go by, people forget. But they had to understand what they were doing wrong, and that's why. No, even Moses didn't go into the Promised Land, but they had to spend 40 years in the desert. Listen, God will right this ship, but God's going to bring us some pain and suffering, and I think it's going to wake us all up. I think every one of us, I think we're all a little bit too comfortable in America. I think we need to get back to the idea that life shouldn't be horrible. We don't want hardship, but we've lost the idea in all this, Joe, of self-sacrifice, of complete giving, both to God and to our families, okay? Somebody mentioned in the chat room earlier about weak men, okay? I'm weak. I don't want to beat myself up. There's many times I'm weak. I don't feel like doing it. I get spiritually lazy, physically lazy. But we got to snap out of that stuff. And it's that sentiment, by the way, Joe, that keeps me coming to do this show both on the Veritas Catholic Network and when we go live on Sundays. because I say, well, I still have to do my part. I still have to follow through with this. We still have to be voices amongst thousands and thousands of voices that are fighting for what's good and true and beautiful. But there's going to be some suffering. You can't get anything good. You're not going to appreciate, hopefully, that promised land that maybe God will bring America to if we don't have a little pain and suffering first. Joe Resinello, great conversation, as always, with you here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. I want to thank everybody out there, all of our friends. Help us out to get even further. If you're not subscribed to wherever you're watching us, Facebook or YouTube or X, please subscribe to us, and please hit the share button. Share our videos. Let's get them out to a wider audience. We'll see you next Sunday. We'll be here again. Joe Resinello will pull up some great things for us to talk about. And until then, remember that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation